So, there's a theory that's gotten a lot of attention lately. It seeks to explain why the world is the way we see it, and it deals prominently with racial issues. Although no classes are being taught on the subject, its influence has reached into our schools. I am speaking, of course, about GRT, Great Replacement Theory. Some of you might have expected me to say CRT, which stands for Critical Race Theory. And while the description I gave is technically vague enough that it could apply to both, the two are not the same thing. In fact, you could even say they're opposites, or at least that they oppose one another. Critical race theory is the demonstrable idea that being part of a larger number of oppressed groups makes you more likely to be oppressed. Essentially, that traits and aspects for which people face discrimination act as force multipliers against one another. An example of the theory without so much oppression involved: if your school is performing Romeo and Juliet, the director wants some very specific things when casting the titular female lead. In this example, you're trying to tick more boxes, but some people just aren't going to. When you're in school, it may be the squeaky wheel who gets the grease because the actor who needs to learn the most is most in need of the part. In the professional world, however, it would be really weird if the directors didn't cast in accordance with their visionary preferences. Critical race theory is not the idea of forcing the director to cast someone who doesn't fit the role, but rather of understanding the sociological reasons why the girl without any talent got it, and knowing how to comfort your talented friend who didn't. In other words, it's about understanding how the world works and empathizing from the perspective of people who tick more boxes on the casting sheet with people who tick fewer, and vice versa. So what's this whole GRT thing? Great replacement theorists are under the impression that a great Jewish conspiracy is bringing immigrants into the country to replace legacy voters with non-white ones to tip the balance in favor of the Democratic Party. This subject would be a lot easier to understand if I had ever taken a class on critical race theory, but unfortunately they're not offered below the college level. I want to try a little thought experiment here, okay? Without claiming empiricism or backing anything up. Suppose, hypothetically, that a national association of people who really love rifles makes a lot of money every time one of you shoots up a supermarket or a school. How do they do that? Well, when we see violence like this going on, we go out and buy guns because of the whole good guy with a gun theory. That means that in this theoretical world space, it is in the association's best interest to encourage gun violence, because the more of it there is, the more they sell. If you've got truckloads of money and want to make more of it by watching children die, still speaking hypothetically here, how do you maximize the number of casualties? Simple. But when I say simple, I actually mean convoluted. First, you hypothetically subsidize talking heads and politicians with huge bribes we call donations to push rhetoric that not only is pro-gun, but also peddles great replacement theory. Great replacement narrative gives miserable people a scapegoat to blame instead of capitalist union-busting corporations, and the politicians who have theoretically been bribed by the strictly fictional National Association of Rifle Lovers ensure that they have access to firearms by blocking background check bills. A desperate person with concocted motive and ready means shoots up a school or a supermarket or a church or a subway. The more people hear about this, the more guns get sold. The more people die, the more we'll hear about it. Maximum casualties, maximum profit. This thought experiment has been purely and explicitly theoretical, and performed without any source material to research, just to explain how we might have gotten to the situation we find ourselves in right now. Persons or organizations mentioned in it are intended to be regarded as fictional, or at least theoretical. So what do? Do we ban assault rifles? Well, that's not really feasible. You see, every rifle is an assault rifle. It's what they're for. Every weapon is an assault weapon. A pencil can be an assault weapon. You need better terminology, unless you want police to be allowed to break down your door for a single-shot breech loader, because they're actually very ready to confront guns and shoot first when those guns are not being used to murder children, hypothetically. There is, however, one thing we could do. Actually, several things. I'll give you a rundown of my personal, subjective thoughts. Expand and enforce background checks for people purchasing a gun. Most of America supports this to some extent, and, to some extent, we absolutely should do it, but our conservative politicians have all been, potentially, bribed to prevent it. Criminalize straw purchases. If you go on Facebook and see somebody offering a picture of a $300 straw on a table beside an AR-15 and a 3-year-old girl, it feels like that should be illegal, doesn't it? Federally classify great replacement rhetoric as a call to violence. We know what they're saying, and we know where it leads. Teach critical race theory in schools. Most of these shootings would have been prevented if the shooters had understood the real reasons why their lives sucked and had been able to empathize with their chosen victims. The fact that we don't have these classes on CRT below the college level is a major oversight on our part, and ought to be remedied immediately. Well, that about wraps it up, folks. I hope I don't have to make my next video on gun ownership, because, that could be a little awkward.